Welcome into the NFC South division preview, and before we get into the video, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. It really helps out the channel. My number one team in the NFC South is the Carolina Panthers, and the strength of this roster is the offensive line. It's one of the main reasons everyone was talking about Carolina as being a quarterback away. They're returning all 5 starters from last season, and this could be one of the better tackle duos in the NFL. Ike Ekwonu had a really promising rookie year. He kind of got baptized by Myles Garrett in week 1, but I think he has top 5 left tackle potential. And then Taylor Moton is so consistent at right tackle. He started 82 games over his career, and he's only had 1 game with a pass blocking grade lower than 50. And they aren't as strong on the interior, but no true weaknesses. Austin Corbett had the best season of his career in my opinion. Bradley Bozeman I view as an average starter. He's going to give up some pressure due to a lack of foot speed, but you can get by with Bozeman as your worst starter on the O-line. And then Brady Christensen took exactly the kind of step you want to see from year 1 to year 2. He cut his pressure rate in half, and he isn't the best run blocker, but he's heading into his 3rd year and he has a lot of athletic upside to improve in that area. But the biggest weakness is wide receiver, and more specifically a proven wide receiver 1. I'm sure they would have loved to keep DJ Moore, but they had to trade him to move up for Bryce Young. So now you've got Terrace Marshall, who had a promising year 2, but he hasn't had a 500-yard season in his career. Laviska Shenault had some big plays last season, but I don't really view him as a high volume receiver. DJ Chark is a really good deep threat, but he hasn't been able to stay on the field. And Adam Thielen kind of seems to be on the downslope at 33 years old. And then Jonathan Mingo they took in the 2nd round. He has all the physical traits you look for, but I view him as more of a developmental player when it comes to separation and route running. So they have 5 receivers that I think would make about every roster in the NFL and could be a good wide receiver 2 or 3, but there's no one I feel comfortable relying on as the number 1 target. My biggest question for the Panthers is number 2 edge rusher. I love Brian Burns, but Yetur Gross-Matos has not been an impactful pass rusher. He had a 5.6% pressure rate last year, which was the 3rd lowest among edge defenders. And they took DJ Johnson in the 3rd round out of Oregon, but it's hard for me to see him making a major impact as a rookie. He's fast, but it's not like he had this dominant speed rush, and he showed flashes of power, but stronger tackles were able to neutralize him and put him on the ground. My breakout pick for the Panthers is cornerback JC Horn. I was going to do a video on him, but going through his tape, they hardly ever played him in man coverage. Only 88 snaps in man last year, and that's kind of what you draft JC Horn to do, is play press man. So his tape from last season, there just wasn't a whole lot to evaluate, but hopefully he can stay healthy and get more single coverage opportunities, because what he did put on tape last year was still impressive. And Carolina's most underrated player is linebacker Frankie Luvu. He doesn't get any national recognition, but turn on a random Panthers game, Frankie Luvu is going to be one of the 2 or 3 most impactful players on this defense, and he affects every aspect of the game. He was an elite run defender last year. He had 23 pressures and 7 sacks, and he isn't the most reliable coverage linebacker, but he still makes some plays in the pass game. So Frankie Luvu and Shaq Thompson I think is a really solid linebacker duo. The Falcons are my 2nd ranked team in the division, 21st overall, and I did a more in-depth breakdown of the Falcons offense, so definitely check that out. But this team's biggest strength is their running game, and this is a shining example of the scheme matching the personnel. Atlanta ran the most outside zone of any team since 2015, and their offensive line is full of great zone blockers. I think Chris Lindstrom is the best guard in football. You could make the argument for Zach Martin, but Lindstrom had a historic performance last season, and he's definitely the best run blocker at this point. And then there's guys like Drew Dahlman and Caleb McGarry who aren't the best in pass pro, but they're really good zone blockers. And Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier is one of the best backfield duos in the NFL. So at least in the regular season, I think the running game should be able to carry this offense. But the biggest question for this team is quarterback. If you're a Falcons fan, I'm sure you're sick of hearing it at this point, but this team's ceiling will be determined by Desmond Ridder. I was pleasantly surprised by his tape from the 4 starts he made last year, especially when it comes to making plays under pressure and outside the pocket. My biggest worry is accuracy. He should be an upgrade to Mariota, but his ball placement was inconsistent in college, and he missed some throws last year. So he doesn't need to be a top 10 quarterback. He just needs to operate the offense efficiently and get the ball in his playmakers' hands. I think edge is still the biggest weakness for this team. They added Zach Harrison, who I think needs a year or 2 before he'll make much of an impact rushing the passer. His problem is that he just really struggles turning the corner at the top of the rush, and he has the length and explosiveness to become a good power rusher, but he doesn't really know what to do with his hands yet. Bud Dupree is a starting caliber edge defender when he's healthy. He can push the pocket and be disruptive as a pass pass rusher, but he's not going to win one-on-ones at a very high rate. Lorenzo Carter has never really turned his elite athletic traits into a refined pass rushing skill set. He's been a 30 pressure, 5 sack a year kind of player for most of his career. And then Arnold Ebiketie is probably my favorite edge rusher on this team. I really liked him coming out of Penn State, but you're hoping for a year 2 jump from him. So there's a lot of options, but kind of like the Panthers receivers, it's a bunch of 2s and 3s. Nobody that I really trust as that number 1 option. My breakout player is safety Richie Grant. I'd kind of forgotten about him. He didn't play much as a rookie, but he really popped when I was watching the Falcons defense. He's an aggressive downhill player, so he's going to get beat sometimes over the top, but he makes up for it with his playmaking ability over the middle of the field. Jesse Bates is a known quantity, but with Richie Grant's emergence, I think this has a chance to be a great safety duo. And I know people are going to disagree with this, but I really do think Kyle Pitts is the most underrated player on this team. He had the lowest percentage of catchable targets in the NFL, and there were so many big plays left on the field where he had clear separation downfield, but Mariota overthrew him. And there were a few drops, but the box score scouts are really overestimating how much of a down year he had. And the Falcons' prove-it player is pretty clearly Jeff Okudah. He dealt with injuries in his first 2 seasons, and his rookie year, he was a complete liability. Last year, he started out playing well, but down the stretch, he was getting beat about once or twice a game, and there's a reason the 3rd overall pick was only worth a 5th rounder. I don't think it's over for Jeff Okudah, but this is probably his last chance at a starting job, so he needs to prove it this year. Coming in at 23, we've got the New Orleans Saints, and for strength and weakness, you can just draw a line down the middle of this defense. The back 7 is one of the best in the NFL. Tyrann Mathieu had another great year. He hasn't shown any signs of slowing down. Marcus May, it's hard to trust him to be on the field at this point, but I do really like Jordan Howden as a prospect, and I think he can step in as the 2nd safety and give them quality play. I like the cornerback room. Marshawn Lattimore is a top 5 corner. He missed a lot of last year with an injury, but he's never really had injury problems before, so I expect him to be back and ready to go. And then with Paulson Adebo and Alontae Taylor, there's a lot of potential at cornerback 2 and 3. Adebo's a playmaker. He'll have some dominant performances, but he is a risk taker, and you'd like him to give up fewer big plays. But I've always been a fan of his game. I loved his tape at Stanford, and I'm still a believer that he can be a good cornerback too. And Alontae Taylor is my breakout pick for the Saints. He had 8 pass breakups last year on just 64 targets, and he missed a couple of easy interception opportunities. He has the size-speed combo to be a premier outside corner. I do question his lateral movement skills and man coverage, but overall, I really like this team's potential at corner. And then the highest rated position group is linebacker, where they rank 2nd behind the 49ers. I have Demario Davis as the Saints' most underrated player. He isn't a sleeper, but when you look at his sustained high-level production over the last decade, I just feel like he doesn't get enough credit. He's great in pass coverage and run defense, and in year 11, he casually set a career high with 9 sacks. And Pete Werner was incredible as a rookie. Last year, I thought was a bit of a step back. There were a lot of missed tackles, and he was getting blocked more easily at the 2nd level, but he was still solid when he was on the field, and he's one of the better number 2 linebackers in the league. My biggest question for the Saints is wide receiver 2. Everything I can find says that Michael Thomas will be ready for the start of training camp, but he's played 3 games in 2 years, so I have a hard time expecting too much from him. If he's back to 100%, then receiver becomes a legitimate strength for this team, but if not, I think it all comes down to Rashid Shaheed. I just did a video on him, and my expectation going into his tape was just a taller Khalif Raymond, but I was so impressed by what he brings to the table. He's obviously a phenomenal deep threat, but I think he can do a lot more than that. He's a really effective intermediate route runner, so quick getting out of his breaks. He didn't have any drops last year, and he looks natural high pointing the ball and making acrobatic catches. So for an undrafted free agent, I do want to see a bigger sample size, but I'm cautiously optimistic about Shaheed as the wide receiver 2. And the Saints' prove-it player is Derek Carr. I thought 2022 was the worst season of his career, mainly in terms of accuracy, although I'm not sure he was bad enough to warrant getting benched. I still think he can be a solid starter, but there are limitations to his game. He's always struggled under pressure and on 3rd down, and his game-to-game consistency isn't where it needs to be. He seems to have 3 or 4 disastrous games every season, so hopefully he can bounce back. I think he's a better quarterback than Andy Dalton, but you watch Dalton's tape from last season, he was actually really good, so I don't think it's a given that New Orleans upgraded their quarterback play. And finally, we've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at 29. Definitely a reset year, especially on offense, but I still think receiver is this team's biggest strength. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin is one of the better receiver duos in the NFL, and Mike Evans over the last few years has actually improved a lot as a route runner in my opinion. He isn't just a jump ball winner, he's a lot better at creating separation than people give him credit for. I was a little disappointed in Russell Gage. He didn't have quite the impact I was expecting expecting, and then they added Trey Palmer and Raheem Jarrett in the draft as deep threats. Probably not going to be major contributors in year one, but they could add more of a vertical element if they're able to get on the field. But their biggest weakness is quarterback. Baker Mayfield's resurgence in LA was short-lived, unfortunately. That first game against Vegas was impressive, but his last 4 games he returned to form. He didn't do a good job protecting the football. He really struggles escaping pressure and avoiding sacks, and he's a really interesting player when it comes to arm strength. If you just lined up every quarterback in the NFL and had them throw the ball as far as they could, he'd probably be top 5, top 7 in terms of arm strength. But when he's on the move or under pressure, it seems like his arm strength falls off a lot harder than most quarterbacks, and he overestimates his ability to push the ball downfield, and he lofts up some easy interceptions. My biggest question is offensive tackle. I don't have any questions about Tristan Wirfs as a player, but moving over to the left side, you never know how much the play is going to drop off. It's hard for me to see him being anywhere close to bad, but still a slight uncertainty there. But the bigger question is Luke Goedeke at right tackle. I really liked his college tape, but there's no way to sugarcoat it. He was awful last year. He really struggled against power. A bull rush was pretty much an automatic 5 yards of displacement into the pocket, and against speed rushes, he would lean into the block instead of sliding his feet, which isn't going to work against NFL 3-techs. I do think he can improve against those quick swipe moves that were giving him issues. My thinking is that in college, he was so dominant with his hands in pass pro. He was just a technician shutting down whatever anyone in the MAC threw his way. But in the NFL, you can't just block with your upper body. Your hands and feet need to be in sync. So hopefully his footwork improves in year 2. And if you want to take the optimistic view on Luke Goedeke, he did finish the year a lot better than he started. His first 6 games, he had a 28.9 pass blocking grade and a 7.3% pressure rate. But his final 3 starts, he had a 76.5 pass blocking grade and a pressure rate of 2.8%. And his 1 start at right tackle, he didn't allow any pressures. So I'm still a believer, but last year was a terrible start. My breakout pick is running back Rachaad White. He's so shifty and elusive in the open field, and he's a reliable receiving threat. I wish his contact balance was a little better. That's really the main thing holding him back, but he should get really good blocking with Ryan Jensen coming back and the addition of Cody Mock, and he's definitely a player I'm targeting in fantasy. And there aren't a lot of underrated players on this team. It's pretty much either established veterans or young players that are unproven. So I went the same route as I did with the Saints, and I'm going with Levante David. Again, everyone knows who he is, and he started to get more recognition once Tom Brady came to Tampa, but I still feel like he's underappreciated. 11 years with the same team, and he's consistently been one of the top linebackers in the NFL, and I would say he's the 2nd best cover linebacker I've watched behind Luke Kuechly. And then I'm doubling up on the prove it player, and I'm going to say Joe Tryon and Logan Hall. Joe Tryon has been solid. He's more of a prove it player as far as getting his 5th-year option picked up and living up to being a first-round pick. With Logan Hall, he needs to take a significant step forward to be considered a starting caliber player. His build as a taller defensive lineman that's still undersized makes it really difficult for him to anchor and run defense. And he doesn't have much urgency as a pass rusher. He's kind of slow getting into his moves, and again, the high cut build limits his ability as a power rusher. So if there isn't serious improvement from Logan Hall in year 2, I would expect the Bucs to draft D-line early for a 3rd straight year. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the video, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, let me know in the comments any NFL players or teams that you'd like me to cover.